Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with Us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty, and I'm here with my co-hosts Johnny Law and Daniel Quinn. On today's episode, we have a patron-submitted prompt about the Bronze Age. But before we get into that, I was going to remind you that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, where you can click the link, follow some instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. As an additional advisement, there was recently some kind of a technical difficulty with our submission. So if you have submitted a prompt within the last couple of months, there's a good chance that that got eaten up by the random Google deletion of that file. In fact, if you're listening to me right now, I'm going to encourage you to go and submit a prompt, whether or not you think that it got submitted properly. You can do that through the website, through the new updated link, or you can go on to our Discord and submit it there as well, whatever you prefer. But anyway, with that announcement out of the way, let's dive right into our prompt for today, which comes from Ewan, a patron. And who boy, this one's a real interesting one. So Ewan says that this is a Bronze Age world with a hefty dose of necromancy, inspired by the game Microscope, a fantastic world-building game that takes a broad view on history. I have Microscope and I have yet to play it, but it is a very interesting game. But on to the tenets. Tenet number 1. All magic is aspected to the spirits of the dead. Tenet number 2. Only those who are pregnant can access magic. And tenet number 3, reincarnation has become a major problem. So, with the tenets out of the way, by the way, thanks again to Ewan for the prompt and for their patronage. But Johnny Law, John, tell us, what is your tenet? How are we approaching this particular setting today?
Yes, sir. I think that this is so light. First of all, I just want to point out to Ewan, however you want to pronounce it, that appreciate just a very light framework of this prompt. Although it does also the openness of it is just that's the hardest thing for me. I like a lot of constriction in when I'm doing a prompt. But anyway, my first tenet is going to kind of take off of his first two tenets, and that the concept of self is what bars people from magic. So basically, that's why it's coming from the dead, because they're blasted off this mortal coil, and they've lost with the death of their bodies, also the death of ego comes along with that, and it's also the reason why pregnant women are able to access it, is because they are no longer just a single entity; they're now two entities in inhabiting a singular space.
Interesting. So let's clarify that one more time. So you're suggesting that
Yeah.
it is the ego of the self that denies people the use and ability to use magic or communicate with the dead spirits in some way?
So I think the dead commute. Well, we can get into this more later, but it seems like the dead are still involved in the world in some way, and that all magic is aspected to them. But I'm just saying that regular people, and namely males and unpregnant females and others included in that group, they are unable to access the magic because they're too caught up in themselves. They don't. They need. I mean, if you could have the death of
Mm,
ego while still living, then perhaps you could unlock some magical secrets.
interesting. My interpretation of that prompt was a slightly different, where you have to be
Mhm.
actively pregnant in order to be able to access the magic, right?
Oh, I still
Oh,
think that. I still
oh,
think
okay,
that too.
okay.
I think once the baby's out, yeah, once the baby's out. Well, have you met new mothers? I would say they're far from egoless people. Sorry, new moms, but mm,
I have 8 nieces and nephews and 2 great
there you go.
nephews. I have several children and I know several new moms. So yeah, I understand what you mean there. Um,
Yeah, my own mom's still riding on the whole birth to me thing from 70 years later. So
oh yeah, I get that. I get that too.
that's a whole nother
I
tenet though
honestly,
that
this
ignores.
is a whole other couch podcast where we're like sit here and talk about mom issues. Anyway, oh boy. Um, so actually, I suppose that we're here because my first tenant was also involved in the way that magic works. And I see similarly, John, I see these three tenets as all very interconnected. And the way that I wanted to
Mhm.
kind of square that was, so the reason that reincarnation has become a major problem is that pregnant people like basically channel the spirits of the dead. And when they do that, they
Mhm.
effectively take in a literal soul. And in doing so, you run the risk of that soul either overriding or like infusing with the unborn person inside of them. So reincarnation becomes like this thing where it's like, oh, that person has basically just overridden and gets to like live over again. So there's all sorts of messy
I
complications and implications there, but I think that's where I'll stop for now.
I think that works hand in hand with both what I just said and with I have to say in the future.
Excellent. That's great. So, Daniel, speaking of tenets, we're blending here. We've got this nice kind of panoply. Daniel, did you also have something to say about the souls of the dead coming in here? What is your first tenet?
Well, in listening to us and discuss pregnancy in the absence of an actual woman, I decided, why don't we take this a step further? So my first tenet is that human women have been extinct since before the Bronze Age began. And so necromancers have to use pregnant creatures to breed humans.
Jesus
Jesus.
Christ.
Joy!
Oh boy. Yeah, that's thoroughly fucked. So okay, so we've got a children of men situation where well, no, we've got what it's the opposite of Why the Last Man? Is that what we're dealing with here?
Oh,
Where it's like it's
I don't know what's going on.
okay.
Why?
So in Why the Last Man, it's a graphic novel series where all the men on Earth die except for one.
Oh, okay.
And so is that kind of what's going on here, just in reverse? And also, there's no last woman on Earth.
Well, I guess you could say that. They're extinct. They've been extinct for some time.
Okay. That's that has a lot of potential. Also, yeah, ironically enough, Daniel, this is like whole bunch of pregnancy talk where the one rare episode where Courtney's not here and it's just Sausage Fest 2024.
Yeah.
So
I thought, why don't we take that literally?
yeah, no, I dig that. It's extreme, but I kind of like it. So yeah.
Are these animals birthing male human babies though?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
and so the animals are the only ones that get magic,
or whatever they can. I guess these necromancers can impregnate. And I don't know how they're doing the impregnation. I'm not suggesting they're fucking animals, but they could, I guess. But I'm assuming because they're necromancers, they're
bestiality.
They're deriving their magic from the pregnant animal. Like maybe because we said the pregnant creatures are the ones that have magic. So maybe when the creature's pregnant, it involves some of what you guys are saying in manipulating the gestation in the animal to make a human.
Oh, okay. So these necromancers are basically, they're more aligned with alchemists, where they're handling magic material and kind of like coaxing magical creatures rather than like directly channeling the magic itself.
Yeah,
right?
and I think that would tie into what John is saying about the ego, and then what you're saying about this corruption that can happen inside of the gestation.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that's kind of interesting too, because that would suggest because my immediate follow-up question is, how come no women have been born? And we can make it so that the problem with reincarnation is that the male soul is literally overpowering any attempt at any feminine soul or femininity in gestation, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of reasons you could come up with, and that would be a great propaganda reason. Like that's what we're being told, that the male ego is too strong. But I don't know why the women are extinct or why they're not being born, but perhaps this magically induced pregnancy won't yield a woman. Like you can't, I guess only life can create life, maybe is a possibility too.
And they just don't have the material for the women. The women material does not exist.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah. I think this also really does a lot for playing with how gender and sex kind of manifest within this culture as well. Like that, I feel like I could spend a whole bunch of time on just talking about how those what does this society look like? How does that manifest? That's super, super interesting, but we don't have the time for that right now. We're going to go on to our second tenets. John, what is your second tenet, and does it involve beast fucking?
It does not involve beast fluffing or fucking or inseminating. I am going back to the reincarnation bit, how it's become a major problem. And I think I'm going to liken it to the collapse of the Bronze Age, or at least partial reason to collapse the Bronze Age, in that or Bronze Age civilization, excuse me, in that the fact that some dead folks are now finding a way to bring themselves out of the other world and back into the mortal world is akin to the migration of the sea peoples into areas of Egypt and Assyria and whatnot, which really threw off was basically just threw off the whole civilization. So it was an influx of these extra people that, on top of famine and natural disasters and whatnot, caused the Bronze Age civilizations to fall apart. So it's basically just that, the balance has now been broken between life and death and animal fucking.
Interesting. And yeah, I see, John, you and I are so very often on a weirdly similar wavelength, I feel.
It's because I steal your notes. Sorry about
I should really stop providing them to you directly before we start the podcast, I suppose. My second tenet is less to do with the collapse of the Bronze Age and more to do with the creation of the Bronze Age. But I too am also really interested in like that transition from the Bronze Age to, say, the Iron Age or the age that exists afterwards. Because you're right, like the idea that like, oh man, we've got famine, pestilence, war, and like an influx of new cultures and people fucks a whole bunch of shit up in an age that literally cannot handle it. Like there's not the lattice work of like civilization and culture to like maintain that, right? Because this is an age where people are still fighting over raw ass materials, like basic, like woods and tins and coppers, right? Like those are what wars are being fought over. But I wanted to focus more on the creation myth of the Bronze Age, which often happens with like a waterborne thing. And I was doing some research into the myth of creation for Bronze Age China, and they start with a flood. I'm like, okay, floods are pretty popular, pretty common within the creation myth. But then I thought, it'd be really fucking cool if the thing that kicked off the Bronze Age here is a flood, but it is a flood from the river of the dead. So it's not just a literal overflow of water, like it's not like an engorged river. It is in fact the bursting of souls from the day, like of the previously dead, that start this kind of Bronze Age. And I think that helps us square the magical aspect of the souls of the dead, why they're like perhaps less contained. And it might have something to do with the extinction of women, but I'd rather keep that kind of vague and mysterious for now, because I feel like that's a cool mystery to hold on to.
Oh, neat. So like the sea peoples that are part of Bronze Age history, they're literally like an effulgence of the dead, like breaking into the Bronze Age world.
Well, are we talking about, Rob was talking about the beginning of this era, right? And I was talking about the end of it.
So it gets kicked off by this flood that causes them to organize. Is that because the first empires appear in the Bronze Age, right?
Yeah,
correct.
Okay. Yeah. So then at the end of it, the sea peoples are coming.
Yes, that's the reincarnation thing. It's a problem because maybe like,
because they're connected. Then it seems.
Yeah, maybe people were skipping the line, so to speak, in the sense of reincarnation. Like, there was this flux of death and rebirth and whatnot, but then someone, some wily necromancer realized that, oh, wait a second, I can actually bring back the person that just died, and that causes a fuck up. I don't know, I might be jumping ahead here, but
that's why I want to talk more about those two concepts, because those seem like they're bookending and setting things up in a cool way. So like we're suggesting that before the Bronze Age, there's this kind of overflow of the world of the dead in the form of a flood. Am I right on that?
Yes, you're exactly correct. Okay. Yeah.
And then at the end, we got the sea peoples who also come from, I assume, the same sort of place, like overtaking the Bronze Age. So are they like from the world of the dead, or are they like a different people?
That sounds so fucking cool, Daniel. Like I love that idea actually. The idea like like they are the flood keepers where they're like, "Hey, we're here to try and clean up the mess." And like their sense of time is just off, or there's like a literal travel distance that they had to get through in order to come and like gather their things together. Daniel, I think you're really onto something by connecting these two together. I think that's a really cool concept that we can roll with.
Yeah. Because I wonder like how they're related. But John, did you have in mind those sea people being like actual people, like a civilization that's out there?
No. So
supernatural.
I was the sea people concept is from actual real world Bronze
Right.
Age. It was this influx of other civilizations that weren't part of the major empires that started. It was immigration basically to stay alive.
Yeah.
It's a hot topic right now. But what I'm thinking is more that the same way that happened in the real world, that in this imaginary world, this new form of reincarnation that's not just the regular cycle of life in this universe, that was that extra influx that tipped the scales and started to help contribute to the collapse.
And then going back to Rob, how did they? So after this flood occurred, like what happened to stop it from destroying the Bronze World and instead kicking it off?
So I'm imagining that it's kind of like when rivers overflow, like it is initially an incredibly destructive thing, especially if there's civilizations built around those areas.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, once the rivers recede, they're typically left with incredibly fertile soil, and they're typically left like more lush and available. So if we use the kind of metaphor of the lake or the river of the dead, I imagine that there's something to that we can kind of figure out.
Yeah, that's cool. That's like the dead seeding the land. And I can see that being suggesting that is what wiped away the women. Like the flood came in and took the maternal instinct out of the world, but it left like a residue of fertility.
Yeah. And we can even
a residue of fertility sounds simultaneously fascinating and gross. I love that.
We could also push this analogy forward towards the end and be like a brush fire, where it's this reincarnation, this influx is now it's destroying the society, but it's also cleansing it for the next age.
I think my second tenet could help you with your rising sea people.
What have you got for us, Daniel? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, whenever I want to introduce an absolute, I always want to also create the exception to it. So my second tenet is a newly reincarnated female Dianist threatens to conquer the world as the first empire forms. So does that have to be the first empire? It sounds like maybe this woman is from the seas, and she's among the sea people, and they're invading to face the first empire, which would be in the Bronze Age.
Yeah.
And it would make sense that she's in the sea because we said that it pulled all the women out of the world.
Yeah. So I like the idea that they're the reincarnation. All right. So now we're tying this all in, that this flood of souls has started this Bronze Age, and then they go through that, and they're contributing the magic, and somehow to keep reproducing they have to use other means besides human women. But then somehow a woman is born, and that is like the reincarnation, and that threatens to dissolve
Change
the whole
everything.
society. Yeah. And maybe maybe she's hidden for a while until she comes of age, that kind of thing. Like
exactly.
And starts creating this dynasty, and then comes back. I like that a lot.
And I could see her being hidden among the sea peoples because they're trying to get their foothold into the Bronze Age world, right? And I also wanted to subvert the idea of, like, usually when you have a prompts or tenets like this, we end up with a matriarchy, or even if the matriarchy is evil, they're like somewhat secretly benevolent, or they have a purpose that's constructive. But I want this female reincarnation to be destructive, like a Hera sort of character.
Okay. Is she trying to destroy life itself, or is she trying to destroy life as this civilization knows it?
I don't know. I would love a character that has more like material concerns. Like she's not a god, and she's more like has plans. So I don't think she'd want to destroy everything, because then what does she have left? Like I think she probably has a purpose or a role, intention to solve, but it's not abstract. It's probably, I want to keep it very material,
Yeah.
Daniel, I'm with you 100% there, because I think that's very thematic with Bronze Age civilizations. Like I was talking about previously, right? It is all about the hard materials that wars are fought over,
Exactly.
right? So I think that that's a really interesting thing. We can also make some kind of some like connections to, I can never remember. I think it's the Hittites or the Hittite. There's a big empire that shocks the world by traveling an incredibly long distance. They sack, I believe it's Babylon and Akkad, maybe, and then they like make off with a bunch of their treasures and then go back and like leave Babylon and Akkad, like, or maybe it was Assyria. You'll excuse me, but my history is very rusty right now. But like it shocks the world with like, oh, this is a war fought over plunder, right? So I love the idea that this woman from the sea is coming to plunder something, right? Something specific, and maybe
Yeah.
I feel like this is perhaps a little too easy or a little too simple, but is it they are experiencing the opposite, where maybe the thing they're coming to plunder is like men or something
that
like
would be
that? Like
so
I
neat.
feel,
Maybe there's
yeah,
I don't want to say that. Maybe all of her. We could make it complex and say all of her men are infertile.
yeah. Oh, but like she still has men, but they're all infertile, and it has something to do
because they're
with the
dead.
flood.
They're part of the dead. The dead can't
Oh,
breathe.
yeah.
It's like
Okay.
having a bunch of White Walkers and whites. That's not gonna work for her. They're
Yeah.
taking care of
Yeah.
her.
Oh, I mean that's also that's so that also works in terms of like Egyptian gods as well, because the Egyptian god of fertility was Sobek, who is also like god of the Nile, I believe.
That's
He was
perfect.
like a big crocodile.
Yeah,
He's a big
big crocodile.
crocodile headed god, and yeah, and he like gifted like the way that he would like present gifts to his followers would through like maximal semen production, basically.
God.
So honestly, this is all
She's come to
syncing up.
plunder your reproductive
Seed.
material.
Coming for your junk.
That's right.
Honestly, though,
Could one of her
this
things,
is
she has a scythe, so she like chops off penises,
Oh wow.
like out of vengeance. You know, like
oh,
that's her principal punishing move. She captures
I mean,
prisoners.
this is very like this is very Big Lebowski, like that performance art where it's like the
Yes.
woman
There's a necklace
with the
of
scissors and
desiccated
stuff like that.
penises.
There you go.
All of her imagery is very phallic, but in an inverted
Oh,
way.
man.
Like the Greeks would make penis statues, like literal statues of penises, and then they would
Right.
revere these things. But in her case, these are like the things she's come to destroy and take.
Yeah. No, these are this is like the this is the equivalent of like booty to her. It's like, all right, like I've come for your men, and it's just like
it's reverse.
they're
It's like the reverse rape that you usually see that happens in history, but in this case, it's her. She's doing this to the world. That's taken women out of it.
yes.
Sorry,
And I think that no, that you're absolutely correct. I think that we can like make something that is equally dark and disturbing. Like it is still taking away people's choices. And I think that in traditional media, it is very often like played for laughs. Like male rape is very often played for laughs, whether it be like, like dropping the soap in prison, or, like, oh, what's that terrible Adam Sandler movie where he has sex with his like teacher, or basically his like teacher rapes him as a very young boy or something
What
like
movie's
that.
that?
Okay, this is a tangent that it's like it's I think it's literally called He's the Man or something like that. It's terrible. It's fucking terrible. Okay, so we've got some really interesting core concepts that we can roll with here. I think that this kind of weird inversion and also like bucking against traditional gender and sexual norms is really interesting to me. I think that there's definitely some potentially really deeply problematic shit in here, but I'm not shying away from that because that's where some really interesting conversations can happen. Okay, so we've knocked out all the tenets, right? I suppose the question that we have now is what other questions do we need to answer about this world in particular before we get on to the recap?
Where do babies come from?
Well, in this world, apparently it's from giant elephant vaginas. So, I mean, actually,
Crossing the Alps.
I suppose this is an interesting question to ask, because if you think about like the creation of Rome, Romulus and Remus were birthed from a wolf, right?
Oh, yeah, there you go.
So
Were they birthed or were they raised? I think they were just
think it was
raised.
birthed.
Question. Let
Yeah,
me
it was
ask
birth.
GPT.
Well, hold on, Daniel. I suppose it is your tenet, so I ask you because it's your vision. I don't want to ruin your vision. What kind of beasts and animals are birthing people in this particular universe?
Oh, I just
We're
asked
suckled.
ChatGPT. It says they're raised by an animal, but I like birth.
Yeah.
I think the necromancers probably were trying a lot of things. So I can imagine there are lots of different animals that they birth humans out of. I imagine they have to be larger animals. Like you couldn't birth a human out of a rabbit, but you can probably do it out of a horse. And you probably would want to, thinking about this economically, create a stock of birthing animals that you can control and produce in quantities to make armies. So horses, cows, herd animals likely. But being that they're necromancers, and this is the Bronze Age, what age is Conan the Barbarian? Is that Bronze Age?
I think it's post Bronze Age. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I
So
think it's Iron Age. It's Iron Age for sure. Yeah.
So like barbarian adjacent age, right? I could imagine the necromancers doing weird shit. So birthing humans out of a tree, birthing humans out of another man, which probably is. I think men themselves must be off limits for some reason. But I think so that's why you can't use humans. Yeah, I feel like other humans doesn't work for some reason. Maybe like grotesque monstrosities come out. But I can see weird stuff like trees and other like jellyfish, a squid, something weird.
Well, first of all, Daniel, I do think that that's really interesting. One, and I think I have an answer to that, which is they don't want men to have access to the magic itself, right?
That's fair.
So that's like one of those things where it's like, ooh, scary. We can't let that man have access to magic, right? That's an easy one.
Oh, because they would be magical by virtue of it.
Direct access to magic, which in this society doesn't typically work like that, right?
Do the necromancers have access to this magic, or are they communing with the dead?
I think they're communing with the dead. Like they themselves aren't. They can't use it so much as to shape what's being gestated.
Yeah, they're kind of directing it. They're project managers. Of
Well, that's why
they have no skill themselves. I'm just kidding.
Talentless acts that inflate the cost of every estimate. Got
it. Allie doesn't listen to this, so that's
fine. Well, John, this is why I liken them to alchemists previously, where they're working with like magic material, but not, and like they're working like magic adjacent, but not like directly controlling magic.
Knowledge base. It's not that they're not shaping the weave, but they're just kind of
they're using magical byproduct. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Rather than like, oh, I cast fireball. It's like, okay, I put these things together and I can approximate fireball, but not nearly as easily or as powerful. You know?
Can we say that whatever is carrying these babies, since they have access to magic now, that they gain some level of like higher sentience?
Just
for that
might be interesting.
Yeah,
maybe like a telepathic kind of
like speak with humans and kind of.
Like I'm thinking like in The Witch, like the goat that like is creepy and talks to see Satan. But I can see like the animals having this weird kind of connection to the necromancer.
Hypnotoad.
Weird shit happens. Hypnotoad sort of situation. Vomits up babies.
I truly believe that this is rich for narrative development, because now I'm just imagining like the one cult that you get to where the animal is secretly in charge. And it's like the necromancers who are under its thrall, when seemingly it's like, oh, this is a patriarchy because technically it's all patriarchy. Anyway, that's kind of what I'm getting at, right?
That'll be so weird. I mean, the other cool thing, it ties the first sentence that you guys had. I think it works it together because if the land has been flooded by the fertility of the dead, then that means brewing in the pregnant bodies of these animals is the spirits of the dead. That's where the magic comes from, the power. And so, and as you're saying, there must be some difficulty in separating the past lives from a new life. And that's why reincarnation has become a major problem. Like if the world has been flooded by the dead, and the only way to generate new life is by brewing the dead in other bodies, you don't always get a new body. Sometimes you get a new soul. Sometimes you get the same thing from the past. So I think it all makes sense structurally so far.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what my tenet was suggesting, where it's like you're getting leftovers or recyclables rather than like something new, right?
Is this going to turn out like me watching Dark right now, where I gotta have like spreadsheets up and like webs of like who's
I need to
where,
watch
what
it.
time, and who's. It's so good.
I want to
Uh,
watch it.
I'm only
I turned it on once and I'm like, oh, it's got German subtitles. I want to
Yeah,
pull
and you
up.
kind of need to watch it in German in the subtitles,
Yeah.
like because it's the emotion when the American dub sounds really goofy to me.
Mhm.
But it's really fucking
Yeah.
good, and it's like crazy how well tied together it is. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
I remember watching the first like 3 episodes and it didn't hook me very well, you know?
Yeah, you
Like
gotta like from what I've read, I'm only like 2 episodes in the second season. Been watching it pretty slowly. But from what I've read, watch the first season, watch the second season, go back, watch the first season again, watch the second season again, then watch the third season. Just that's
see,
how interconnected it is.
I normally really like media that requires like its own course like in
Mhm.
college to like appreciate. But like I don't know, like maybe it is postgraduate like brain rot for me. But like I have no interest in like like
At
needing to
work.
get a PhD
Yeah.
to appreciate. So yeah, I think you know what that's probably what it is for me too. Where it's like
Yeah.
I'm getting like stress sweat from thinking about like I have
Yeah.
to write a paper about this.
Well,
There's going to be a paper about this thing at the end of the semester. You know, like that kind of thing.
to be honest, they do lay it out really well. Like you can kind of, if you want to do the work to try to guess what's happening, you can, but or else you could just wait till they tell you. Like it's like it's not it's cool like that they actually it's
Oh,
not
it's good.
they like every it's just saying that
They lay it out eventually.
yeah, everything that you have the tools ahead in front of you to figure out exactly what's going on from like early on, but you just would never think that that's the case because it's fucking
That I
crazy.
appreciate.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
it's I'm and I feel like the third season just is tying all the bows at the end, but I haven't got
Like,
there yet. Anywho,
do you remember that show Primer? It's the opposite of what you're saying,
oh no,
where you need all the crap that Rob is saying. Like you need spreadsheets
yeah,
and freaking board to figure it out. But then they also don't explain a damn thing,
I
and it's a
hate that.
terrible movie.
I hate that.
So it's shitty to watch. It's super
Yeah.
complicated, and even when you do get what it's doing, you're kind of like, ugh.
I mean, it's like saying it's the way I feel about Lost. Like it was so good in so many ways, and then just when it came down the end, they're like, really, it doesn't really explain anything. I'm like, okay, like, was it just a dream? You said it wasn't supposed to be purgatory. That's basically purgatory. What the hell, Lost?
Man, spoilers for Lost, but I would argue that you shouldn't watch Lost anyway. So not really too worried about that spoiler. All right, I feel like we've rambled enough. I think it's time that we recap our tenets and figure out whether or not we've been left satisfied. So, John, you started us off this week. What was your first tenet, and how have we incorporated?
Oh boy, where were we? So my first tenet was that the concept of self is what bars people from magic. That the dead are able to control it because they are detached from the mortal coil, and pregos have access because they are not a single entity anymore.
And have we integrated that well? Do we need to talk more about it? What
Yeah.
are we thinking?
No,
here?
I think it's pretty well integrated. I mean, we keep going. Um, we didn't go too hard on it, but I feel like it still has time to come in. And in fact, I think it could be tied in with our destroyer of worlds when she gets involved,
Mm.
and that somehow she has a greater thought of things.
Yeah, in my head, I'm thinking about this conquering woman as like she comes in like on the like mast of a boat or like at the very front of a long ship or something
Yeah.
like that. She's got a spear in one hand, she's very visibly pregnant, and like she is a representative of the kind of like oh, actually, this makes things really interesting because you're suggesting that you need a lack of ego in order to commune and channel this magic.
Mhm.
And I think that a conqueror coming into a land bereft of ego is really, really interesting and leaves the door open for some really cool kind of ideological
Yeah.
battles and stuff like that.
And when we say ego, what do we mean exactly?
It's just your aspect of self in the world. So to be without it would be to become more one with, not seeing yourself as a single entity, but whereas connected into, hippie shit. Um,
So basically, like because the unborn, they don't have an identity yet. That's why they're magical.
the unborn, yeah. So and that's partially why the pregnant creatures, I guess in this case now, are also able to tap into this magic is because they're no longer just themselves. They are with
Oh,
child.
more,
Yeah,
more than one
there's
thing.
two
I
forms
see.
together, so it's they don't have like the full on power that the dead have because the dead are completely pulled out of the world and able to
Mhm.
see it for the bigger picture.
Mm.
Oh, I like that. So then that raises some questions. So then the image of her being pregnant was interesting. So does that mean, is she like continually
Ooh, I
pregnant?
like that a lot.
There's, like there's
Yes.
two ways it could go. She's either continually pregnant and can constantly, and she's producing heirs, or she's looking to get pregnant, and so she has to make pilfers,
Mm.
from the world.
I think that the reason that this woman is coming into the new Bronze Age world as a conqueror is because she no longer has the ability to be pregnant,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Like her coming onto the shore visibly pregnant is literally the last pregnancy that she has, and so she's like, "All right, we've got to conquer this new place because otherwise, I'm going to lose my ability to
Her
tap into
power.
this magical we." Exactly, yeah.
And I
So
can
again, really interesting directions that we can take with that.
But I can imagine too that when she's out in the wherever the sea is with her army of the dead, like she probably has to bring people to her. Like that's why she's plucking them. So she must make a decision at some point. Like this is not enough, and then she returns to the
Mhm.
world.
Yes. And okay, we could easily go on forever about this. Because I'm like, oh man, this is really interesting. I feel like we should probably save a little bit of that for next time, unless we need to talk more about it. Now, my first tenet, by the way, was oh god, hold on. Oh, it was all similarly to John's, related to the idea of like magic and reincarnation. And the way that I kind of squared that was, you channel the souls of the dead through the magic, and when you do so, the soul of the dead person that you're channeling can potentially bleed into or override the soul of the unborn person within them. So I feel like we've integrated that very well. I think that, again, John and I's in particular, we're just on that same wavelength, so to speak, in that regard. So yeah, I think that I'm happy with that 100%. And Daniel, what was your first horrific tenet that I just remembered?
The women are extinct, and necromancers use pregnant creatures to breed humans, or cause pregnancies in creatures to breed humans.
That's gross, unpleasant, and I hate it. And that's really interesting and cool, Daniel. Yeah. Again, I think that has kind of set up the conflict within this world pretty well. I think the idea of the sea people being this conquering woman who needs like literal male seed in order to continue to prosper, I think that's really interesting. So yeah, cool. We're happy with that. Yes.
I couldn't imagine a world more horrible where there are no women in it. Like,
Amen, brother.
and I'm not saying
Amen.
this. Yeah, I'm not saying this to suck up to women, but just because men are just so awful in general, Like, there's very few that are good, that are fun, present company, but the vast majority are just such dicks.
Oh man.
I mean, women are terrible too. They can be terrible, but generally, my
people just
experience
suck in
has been
general,
that I get
but
along. Yeah. But I get along with women more easily.
myself included.
Hey, I don't disagree with that, honestly, but okay, we got to move on. We got more tenets to work through. Looping back around, John, what was, because I have a question for you that I'm going to ask later. But okay, John, what is your second tenet? What do you got for us?
So my second tenet kind of evolved as we discussed more and more. And initially, it was that reincarnation is akin to the migration of the sea people in the real collapse of the bronze and our collapse of the Bronze Age. Um, but this kind of got taken literally to bringing in actual sea people from another continent, which I'm actually okay with. I think so. I'm kind of dropping the reincarnation bit, and more it's just that there are actual, just like in the Bronze Age, that there was actual a group of people that came out that just happens to be led by a woman, the last woman.
Mm.
I mean, you could dive into your original concept a little more. Like, we could say that her army or her peoples are in fact reincarnated people.
No, you ruined it
because they're
it's past. It's done. I'm done. I'll give up.
Because they're people of the dead, right? The dead is the.
I'm playing games on my phone right now. I'm totally.
If you hear Subway Surfer during any point of the rest of the episode, please know that it's John.
That's a game, Subway Surfer.
Oh man,
I don't do mobile
you're
games.
not brain rotted enough.
I don't do mobile
Yeah, you're
games.
not brain rotted enough, John.
No,
Sorry.
I just do puzzles. No, I think I like where it ended up, to be honest, and I wasn't that attached to I wanted to develop it anyway, so I feel like that the way that it's gone, that there is this actual other entity that's been brought out of the woodwork. No, I'm happy with it. I'm happy where we landed.
Mm. Yep. This is very ego death of you, John. How thematically appropriate. Yeah. All right. And speaking of sea peoples, I feel like part of the reason that it became kind of mixed up is because of the way that John and I's second tenets interacted. My second tenet was the ushering in of this kind of age of no women is due to the flood of the river of the dead kind of coming in and causing a massive upheaval within society, but also the progeneration or just generation, something like that, the creation of this new age. So I'm very happy with how we've kind of worked through that as well. Again, I think the literal embodiment of this being like the last woman or the forever mother, whatever it might be, like, yeah, I'm happy with how this has kind of worked out. And that finally leads us to tenet number 2 from Daniel. Daniel, what was your second tenet? And are you feeling satisfied with how it is right now?
Yep, that's my horrible Hera woman coming back to pillage your countryside from the ocean.
Yeah.
She is a reincarnated female member of a dynasty, threatens to conquer the world after the first empire forms.
Yeah, I think that sets us up for a great and very interesting conflict in the next episode. And speaking of the next episode, everyone's satisfied with the way that their tenets kind of spread out here. I'm happy with it. So that means that we get to roll for a twist and then figure out how to reconcile that in the next episode.
One thing I wanted to note too is the prompt mentions microscope, which is an interesting RPG. And I think the process that we do here is similar to playing a game of microscope almost. I think it's worth noting.
No, I agree. I think that there's definitely some overlap between us and Microscope the game. I think that there's less dice rolling in our podcast, but you know.
Right. But we do have dice.
we still have dice. That's true.
Yeah.
And our twist this time is they are all clones.
God damn it.
Which that's a real interesting one, all things considered, with this particular prompt. But
Can work.
Oh, we can figure it out for sure. Yeah. Speaking of the prompt, by the way, a big thank you once again to our patron Ewan for this particular prompt. And oh boy, this one is real interesting, getting away from us real fast. So before we get even more off the rails, I'm going to call it there. That's going to do it for this episode of World Build with us. Remember that if you want us to build your world like we did with Ewan's, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, click the link, follow the instructions, all that good stuff. I'm going to encourage everyone to send in a prompt. You can do that through our website or through Discord directly, whatever you'd prefer. Also, we have a Discord, did you know? Of course, if you wanted to follow us directly on social media, we're over on Twitter and YouTube, where you can subscribe, do all that fun stuff. Or you might, realistically, you might be listening to us on YouTube right now. But if you'd prefer to give us money, or you just want to say thank you for the podcast, you can do so. We have a Patreon. You can go ahead and give us money over there, support us, and get access to sweet, sweet patron-only goodies. So that's going to do it for this episode of World Build with us. Remember that we love you very much. We're going to get through this together. Until next week.